Rotations have decided matches for Italy more often than a single striker's finishing touch. They win space, force mismatches, and sometimes ignite locker room clashes. In this video, you'll see exactly how Italy's rotations work on the pitch and off it. The in-game position swaps that open defenses, the squad rotations that trigger selection arguments, and the substitution patterns coaches use to change tempo. Rotation, simply put, is players trading roles to create advantage. A winger tucks inside while the fullback overlaps. A holding midfielder drops to form a back three, or two central midfielders rotate to drag markers out of position. First, we'll show the moments when those movements are planned versus when they're improvised. Freeze frame the 63 minute rotation that created a clear shot, and annotate the cues, body angles, first touch direction, and pass timing that tell you it's coming. Watch because you'll learn practical signs to spot rotations in real time, understand how coaches execute them through drills and substitutions, and see why a single rotation can flip a game or fracture a squad. Stay with me, and first I'll break down 4 repeatable rotation patterns Italy uses, how to read them live, and the exact execution steps coaches demand on the training ground. 1. What if Italy's main rival ahead of the 2026 World Cup isn't Brazil or France, but their own dressing room? Dressing room cohesion directly determines selection clarity, tactical execution, and ultimately match results. When internal rivalries become the principal variable, everything from training intensity to substitution patterns is distorted. Coaches and directors routinely treat squad harmony as a performance metric alongside fitness and tactical readiness. Evidence from professional clubs shows that unresolved internal conflict raises injury risk, reduces effort in training, and complicates match-day decision-making. Define rotation as a controlled plan that assigns playing time and roles according to objective criteria. Current form, physical load metrics, GPS, heart rate variability, perceived exertion, tactical matchup, and short-term recovery needs. Put simply, rotation is not random, it is rule-based. To execute, create a rotation matrix that lists each position, primary and secondary starters for each formation, and the permissible minutes ranges for different competition types, qualifiers, friendlies, and tournament matches. Use training microcycles to simulate the systems each player will occupy, then validate readiness through small-sided games and full-intensity dress rehearsals before allocating meaningful minutes in friendlies or less critical qualifiers. Link tactical selection to rotation by mapping player profiles to systems. A wide, explosive wingback will be prioritized when Italy plans a 3-at-the-back system. A static, ball-circulating fullback gets preference in a flat 4. Coaches should prepare 2 or 3 working templates, say a possession-oriented 4-3-3 and a counter-pressing 3-5-2, and name starters for each template rather than for the vague label First 11. In practice, this means holding system-specific training sessions, designating bench roles tied to the active system, and predefining substitution scripts. Who comes on to add pace, who replaces an exhausted press forward, and who slides into midfield to shore up a late lead. Those scripts should be rehearsed so that players know exactly what the coach will ask when they enter. Leadership structures reduce the chance of dressing room rivalry becoming destructive. Establish a leadership group with delegated responsibilities, captain on-field decisions, vice-captain liaising with staff, a player's representative for off-field welfare, and formalize weekly meetings where feedback is logged and acted upon. Execution steps include scheduled one-on-one player reviews with clear objectives, confidential mediation when tensions arise, and a transparent code of conduct that outlines consequences for public dissent. If a player breaches the code, follow a predictable remediation pathway, short-term exclusion from non-essential squads, mandated team-building tasks, and a performance-based reintegration plan monitored by staff. Practical integration of youth and veterans is crucial to avoid factionalism. Pair emerging talents with veteran mentors during training and travel, rotate squad accommodation and seating so cliques don't harden, and give young players defined, incremental minutes in lower-stakes matches to prove readiness. A concrete example of execution: assign a young midfielder specific transition responsibilities in a friendly, record performance and recovery data. Discuss the report in a post-match mentorship session, then decide starting opportunities for the next tactical template based on that evidence. This keeps competition healthy, measurable, and directly tied to selection. Media management and clarity of message close the loop. When internal disputes become public, they amplify pressure and make other players take sides. Coaches must set a simple communication rule: single spokesperson on selection issues and brief, factual updates after training, with private disciplinary conversations kept off the record. Practically, that means scheduled press conferences where rotation rationale, form, fitness, tactical fit, is explained without singling out individuals, and internal notes to the squad summarizing rotation plans so surprises are minimized. When the dressing room is organized this way, the internal rivalry becomes a motivator rather than an opponent. 2. An analysis of the behind-the-scenes war within the Italian national team. How leadership disputes, factions within the team, and conflicts of interest directly alter tactics at the World Cup. A clear and frequent trigger for tactical change is leadership dispute between the head coach and the dressing room leaders. When a captain or senior core openly contests a coach's plan, the coach often adjusts formation or personnel to regain buy-in rather than to optimize matchup advantages. For example, if senior defenders resist a high defensive line, the coach may abandon an aggressive offside-based scheme in favor of a deeper back four, which immediately reduces space for a counter-pressing forward line and forces midfielders to adopt a more conservative shape. That single concession cascades. Central midfielders drop deeper, fullbacks overlap less, and the team's planned vertical transitions lose their earlier speed and directness. Club-aligned factions operate less visibly but are equally disruptive, particularly in rotation patterns. Players who arrive at camp already tight from shared club systems will push for roles and rotations that mirror club routines. Those from other clubs push back. Tactical rotations: who starts, who comes on at 60 minutes, who fills the pressing role versus who is a late-game finisher, become bargaining chips. In practice, this looks like the coach rotating a preferred ball-playing midfielder into the starting 11th to placate a Juventus-leaning group, while benching a quicker, transitional midfielder favored by players from another club. The result is an inconsistent midfield profile across matches. One game built on possession and tilting triangles, the next on quick vertical passes, and no stable pattern for opponents to study. Conflicts of interest, whether from agents, club medical staff, or federation politics, alter execution down to the micro-tactical level. Agents may lobby for their clients to see minutes in showcase fixtures, pressuring a coach to use a star as a late, impact sub rather than in a starting role that was tactically intended. A tactical example: the coach plans a 4-3-3 that relies on the left winger to press the opponent's right back from kickoff, setting a trap for immediate turnovers. If that winger is instead used as a 70th minute substitute to manage minutes for club demands, the team loses its early pressing trigger and must adopt a passive first half, allowing opponents to build attacks more comfortably. Medical safeguarding by clubs may also restrict pressing-intensive minutes for certain players, forcing substitutions earlier than intended and undoing the planned rotation rhythm for the rest of the squad. Rotations themselves must be explained in operational terms because they are where leadership friction becomes visible on the pitch. Squad rotation involves deliberate changes across games to balance fatigue, tactical variety, and morale. Tactical rotation is adjusting roles within a match. For example, swapping a Metsala for a number 10 to shift from overloads in the half space to more direct wing play. When factions demand or block specific rotations, the team loses its ability to change tempo and shape predictably. Practically, a coach who cannot rotate his deep-lying playmaker due to pressure from senior players will hesitate to switch to a two-striker system mid-match, since the remaining midfielders lack the positional discipline to cover the expanded front line, leading to instability between the thirds. Set-piece routines and role-specific responsibilities are often the quietest casualties of internal wars, but they are decisive in tournament football. Leadership disputes about who should take free kicks or penalties can produce last-minute changes and erode clarity. If the designated penalty taker is sidelined publicly by a factional decision, an alternate may step up under pressure without practice in the team's penalty readiness drills. That translates into missed chances. Similarly, defensive set-piece assignments require intimate communication and trust. If leaders undermine one another, markers pull away or fail to switch properly, creating exploitable gaps in crucial moments. Finally, in-game management reflects these tensions in substitution timing and tactical pivots. Coaches under internal pressure are likelier to make conservative subs aimed at placating influential players rather than shifting the tactical pattern to respond to opponents. A late substitution intended to save face for a senior forward may replace a pressing forward with a less mobile striker, instantly collapsing the team's high press and forcing midfielders into recovery roles they were not primed for. Over a World Cup campaign, these small execution failures accumulate, turning theoretical tactical plans into a patchwork of compromised systems. 3. How conflicts in the dressing room ruin a coach's tactical plan. A coach's tactical plan depends on predictable, repeatable behaviors from a selected group of players. When dressing room conflicts intervene, those behaviors fracture quickly. Coaches map roles: who presses the ball carrier, who drifts wide to create overloads, who stays compact to cover counters, and expect these roles to be executed in both training and matches. If senior players or influential figures openly resist a role, whether because of personal rivalry, perceived decline in status, or disagreement with selection, the coach cannot reliably implement systems that require buy-in from the whole unit. Rotations are a core example where friction is immediately tactical. A rotation policy might alternate a high-energy wingback with a more conservative fullback across a 3-game cycle to manage load and maintain width without losing defensive stability. In practice, this requires the coach to bench a beloved veteran occasionally and to communicate why the change benefits the team. When conflict arises, teammates lobbying for the veteran or the veteran publicly questioning selection, the coach often bends, keeping the veteran in despite rising fatigue. Execution suffers the next match. The wing lacks gas to press the wide midfielder at 70 minutes. Defensive shape stretches, and the team concedes space in transition. That single deviation from a planned rotation can ripple across phases of play and undo weeks of tactical work. Training ground execution is another clear link between dressing room harmony and match tactics. Coaches design micro-sessions to perfect coordinated pressing triggers and coordinated zonal shifts. These drills depend on precise midfield angles and timed sprints from fullbacks. If a subgroup of players is disengaged, arriving late, half-hearted, or openly critical during drills, the timing of pressing triggers breaks down in games. For example, a midfield pivot who refuses to step up at the coach's instruction leaves a 2-meter gap in front of the defense. Opponents exploit that gap to carry the ball into the midfield third and play through the lines. That is not abstract. It is a sequence of missed-rehearsed actions leading to concrete loss of territorial control. Substitution patterns and contingency plans are compromised by locker room tensions as well. A coach may plan a 60th-minute change to switch from a narrow 4-3-1-2 into a wider 4-3-3, relying on a specific bench winger to stretch the pitch. If the player feels ostracized, or if the starting winger protests being substituted in front of teammates, the coach hesitates and delays the change, or picks a safer but less suitable option. In-game, the opponent senses the delay and consolidates central density, nullifying the intended tactical pivot. On the flip side, if a substituted-on player was not given full tactical rehearsals because of earlier training withdrawal, they may drift to their habitual tendencies rather than follow the coach's instruction, undoing the substitution's purpose. Set pieces illustrate the micro-level damage conflicts due to tactics. Defensive corner routines, for instance, are a choreography of zonal lines, pick-and-replace movements, and assigned marks. When one experienced defender disputes an assigned opponent to be zonally covered, a second defender must compensate mid-action. The result is a hole at the near post or an unmarked runner at the penalty spot. Opponents need only one such error to convert. Tactical theory says assign and rehearse. Execution requires trust that every individual will follow the assignment under pressure. Conflict corrodes that trust. Leadership and communication breakdowns finish the cycle. Captains and senior players are the conduit between the coach's plan and the dressing room's mood. If they side with dissenters, they can undermine substitutions, rotation enforcement, or formation shifts by privately telling teammates to stick to comfort zones rather than adapt. That behavior changes matchday signals. A coach's pre-planned pressing cue, say, the fullback stepping up on the opponent's left back, no longer triggers uniformly because players have been primed to question it. As a result, opponents exploit uncoordinated responses, coaches are forced to simplify tactics into conservative schemes, and the original strategic aim, whether to dominate possession, press high, or transition quickly, fails in execution. 4. A clash of styles. Defensive classic calcio versus modern attacking football. The Italian national team often must reconcile two concrete tactical approaches on the pitch: a compact, risk-averse defensive model that prioritizes structure and cover, and a more progressive attacking model that emphasizes width, verticality, and coordinated rotations to destabilize compact defenses. In practical terms, the defensive approach centers on a narrow block where center backs and central midfielders minimize horizontal space between lines, fullbacks remain disciplined, and a deep-lying playmaker, regista, controls tempo from in front of the back line. Coaches translate that theory into execution through clear positional roles: who steps to press, who drops to cover, and which channel each player is responsible for when possession is lost. When the team shifts toward modern attacking football, positional rotations are the primary tool to create overloads and open channels. For example, an outside midfielder, mezzala, will slide wide into the half space while the fullback overlaps on the outside. Simultaneously, the regista carries the ball into midfield to occupy opponents, and the forward drops between the lines to pull a center back out of position. This rotation sequence, mezzala wide, fullback high, regista forward, striker dropping, is practiced repeatedly in training, so every player knows the trigger and the immediate defensive fallback. Short. It works because each movement has an assigned cover. The nearest central midfielder moves laterally to close the vacated interior zone, and one center back shifts wider to provide an outlet. Rotations must be timed and rehearsed. Coaches use phase drills that isolate each rotation pattern. First, a 4v4 rondo in the half space to train the mezzala/fullback exchange. Then a 7v5 overload where the false nine withdraws and wingers make diagonal runs behind static defenders. Finally, a condition game where defenders are instructed to react only after the first pass to train recovery positioning. These exercises link theory to execution by forcing players to experience the exact moments when a rotation produces an advantage and when it leaves a gap that must be immediately covered. Quick. The result is muscle memory. Players learn not only where to move, but when to retreat. Defensive rotations are equally structured and clear. In the compact system, when a fullback is drawn up or beaten, the nearest central midfielder must rotate back into the channel while the other midfielder compresses the space in front of the center backs. One center back steps out to engage the ball carrier while the other sweeps behind. Training this uses shadow defending drills and situational 5v5s that start with a numerical disadvantage for the defenders to force precise, communicated rotations. Communication is non-negotiable. Without it, rotations create chaos instead of cover. Match execution requires simple decision rules tied to triggers. Examples of triggers include opponent fullback receiving with their body open, signal for immediate press; central forward dropping between lines, signal for the nearest winger to make an in-behind run; or a midfield rotation toward the flank, signal for the pivot to drop and form a back three momentarily. These rules are embedded into team talks and illustrated on the training ground with repeated scenarios so players can respond instinctively. Short again, that is how the team can switch from a low, guarded block to an expansive, rotating attack within a single phase of play. Selection and role clarity underpin successful application. A regista must be comfortable sitting between center backs and dictating tempo. Wingbacks need the stamina and timing to explode forward and recover. Mezzala players must be able to occupy wide half spaces without losing the ability to track back. Coaches map out precise contingency rotations before matches. If the wingback advances, which midfielder covers the corridor? If the striker drops to link, who occupies the penalty area for the eventual cross? These are not abstract questions, but executable instructions delivered in training sessions and match plans. Finally, transitions stitch the two styles together. Executed well, attacking rotations create numerical superiority and clearer channels, while practiced defensive rotations ensure that counters are met with immediate compactness. Coaches rehearse the exact moments of transition, first touch, second pass, third pressure, so that players know the sequence. Attack, rotate to overload, lose possession, compact, and reset. Short and decisive. That cadence keeps the national team flexible, allowing it to harness the defensive discipline of classic calcio while exploiting the spatial intelligence and fluid rotations demanded by modern attacking football. 5. Why disputes between veterans and young players affect the formation, pressing, and selection of the starting lineup. A split between established internationals and emerging talent directly changes who starts and how the team executes its pressing and formation choices. Veterans typically anchor positional responsibility and expect a clear, disciplined structure. Younger players often push for systems that exploit pace, vertical passing lanes, and aggressive triggers. Coaches confront a trade-off, selecting the lineup that conserves defensive organization versus one that maximizes dynamism and high-intensity pressing. That choice is not theoretical. It dictates whether the side sets up in a narrow shape to protect space or in a wider, higher line designed to force turnovers. Pressing is a collective behavior that depends on predictable roles and timing, and disputes disrupt both. When senior players are reluctant to commit to sustained high press because of fitness or risk management, the front line can send premature or isolated triggers that leave gaps between the forwards and midfield. Conversely, if young forwards press hard but the midfield and fullbacks do not synchronize, opponents exploit the vacated channels with direct passes. Coaches must therefore define explicit pressing triggers. Examples include a sloppy back pass, a miscontrolled first touch, or progressive play down a flank, and then drill the exact response for each role. In practice, this looks like front three movement rehearsed against shifting defensive blocks, midfielders conditioned to step up on cue, and a designated veteran who stabilizes the back line when the press is bypassed. Rotation policies are the primary tool to manage these disputes while preserving tactical integrity. Rather than anno domini hoc changes, effective rotations are role-based and match plan-driven. Identify interchangeable profiles, e.g., a defensive pivot and an aggressive box-to-box, and alternate starts across fixtures that demand different intensities. Coaches can stagger playing time within matches by using youth for energy bursts and veterans for game management phases, but only if the handover preserves pressing distances and communication. A concrete execution example. The coach starts with a conservative pivot to hold shape while the young winger is tasked with early pressing sequences. If the opponent counteracts, the coach substitutes in a veteran central midfielder to re-establish compactness and clear defensive lines. Training integration turns theory into execution and reduces selection conflicts. Practical drills include scenario-based small-sided games where one team practices a coordinated high press with clear trigger rules, and the other practices breaking those triggers. This exposes who reads cues and who hesitates. Pairing a veteran with a youngster in the same unit during full-speed repetitions builds complementary habits. The veteran calls for depth control and line discipline, while the younger player practices the timing of forward runs and pressing angles. Selection decisions should then follow transparent criteria tied to these drills: tactical fit, pressing reliability, and situational utility, rather than status alone. Clear, communicated rotation templates that preserve at least one experienced organizer per pressing phase keep the starting lineup functional and reduce the tactical fallout of interpersonal disputes. 6. Which 2026 World Cup matches Italy could lose not on the field, but in their minds? Mental cracks show up in predictable match types. Opening games where nerves are raw, final group fixtures that require only a draw and invite passive play, knockout ties that hinge on penalties, and fixtures scheduled after long travel or quick turnarounds. Coaches and staff know these are red zones because they combine heightened expectation with tactical nuance. Fans expect control, while players face the twin dangers of complacency and panic. For example, a group decider where a draw advances Italy can flip from disciplined possession to cautious hoofing if the squad mentally tightens. The practical fix begins long before kickoff with clear role definitions and a rotation map signed off by coaches, captains, and sports scientists. Rotations are where tournament theory meets on-pitch execution. Instead of anno domini hoc changes, establish a rotation hierarchy. A core spine of players who remain in most matches, and a rotation pool of like-for-like options prepared to slot into specific tactical templates. Communicate this hierarchy openly inside the squad so backups understand their exact responsibilities. In practice, that means training fullbacks and wingbacks in identical positional drills so a rotated right wingback can execute the same press triggers as the starter. It means rehearsing two midfield pairings in the same defensive shape so there is no drop in pressing intensity when personnel change. On match day, use real-time monitoring, load, sleep reports, and recovery feedback to trigger planned rests rather than reactive substitutions. That way, a trusted substitute enters with the same instructions and familiarity, removing a mental doubt about whether the team has changed its plan. Penalty shootouts and high-pressure knockouts are classic mental minefields and require repeated, live-condition rehearsal. Build simulated shootouts into training that include crowd noise, delayed kick sequences, and randomized shooter order so players learn to execute under disruption. Assign and rehearse a clear penalty order, but also prepare a contingency system for last-minute changes so nobody hesitates. Goalkeeper preparation must be consistent. Use video to identify shoot tendencies, rehearse decision-making with live shooters, and keep goalkeeper selection stable unless injury forces a change. Tactical substitutions in tight knockouts should be rule-bound and simple. Bring on defensive reinforcements if your team is pinned in its half. Introduce an aerial target if you need to disrupt a compact block, or throw on an energetic presser when the opponent looks comfortable on the ball. Train those exact scenarios so players recognize the cue and respond without second-guessing. Other mental losses come from environmental stress, hostile stadiums, perceived officiating bias, jet lag, and they are preventable with specific routines. Create short, repeatable pre-kickoff rituals that center the team. A unified warm-up sequence, a two-line briefing from coach and captain outlining immediate objectives, and a practiced reset signal for moments of panic, a verbal cue or hand signal that reorganizes defensive shape. Practice dealing with adverse refereeing by running set-piece reviews and rehearsing reactions to VAR stoppages. This reduces impulsive retaliation and keeps the team focused. Leadership must be distributed. Assign a vice-captain to manage on-field calming, and give defined communication roles to senior defenders so information flows fast and clear. When Italy faces a compact underdog, avoid the mental trap of playing safe. Instead, execute a simple, repeated plan. Use width, quick rotation of one striker with a deeper forward to pull defenders, and targeted substitutions to maintain tempo. So confidence grows with each completed phase rather than erodes under frustration. 7. Team psychology. What happens when players lose trust in each other? 8. If you want to watch Italy's matches at the 2026 World Cup, understanding not only the 4-3-3 formation, but also what's going on behind the scenes, watch this video to the end and write in the comments whose side you're on, the coach or the players. Trust between teammates is the foundation for coordinated movement, measured risks, and successful rotations. When it fractures, the 4-3-3 collapses from a fluid system into a collection of isolated roles. On the pitch, this shows up first as delayed decisions. A fullback hesitates to overlap because he doubts the central midfielder will cover the half space. A Metsala refuses to drift wide for fear of being exposed centrally, and the striker stops dropping to create space because no one follows the run. Communication drops sharply too. Fewer vocal cues, less pointing, and reduced eye contact. So timing that used to be automatic now relies on visible, conservative cues instead of intuition. The immediate tactical effect is a breakdown in rotation sequences that produce overloads. Opponents exploit the resulting 2v2s and gaps between lines, forcing more direct play and increasing turnovers. Rotations must be explained as sequences with triggers and responsibilities, not abstract ideas. For example, when the deep-lying pivot steps between the center backs to receive, the right Metsala should shift into the half space, and the right fullback overlaps into the vacated flank. The striker then drifts wide to open a channel for the Metsala's run. If players trust each other, the pivot can check to receive, knowing the center back will cover his zone. Trust missing, and the pivot either refuses to move or receives under pressure because the center back didn't step up. Trainable drills make this concrete. Run 5v4 shadow possession, where the pivot is the only outlet and teammates must rotate within 3 touches. Repeat until movement patterns become reflexive. Short-sided rondos that force the pivot to fullback rotation on the 3rd pass teach both timing and who covers which lane, rebuilding confidence through repetition. When trust erodes, tactical substitutions and rotations on the bench become flashpoints. Coaches who insist on tactical rotations despite visible player hesitation risk undermining morale if the group perceives instructions as unrealistic. Players who publicly ignore rotation plans by refusing to execute them surrender tactical control to the coach's decisions and invite harsher penalties. Rebuilding trust requires both micro and macro interventions. Small, on-field fixes like explicit cover calls and immediate role swaps during stoppages, and off-field measures such as targeted training sessions, individual meetings, and video review showing successful rotations. Captains and senior pros must model the expected behavior by calling for the cover, demonstrating the overlap, and accepting temporary personal sacrifice. These visible acts of responsibility restore belief faster than theoretical pep talks. To understand what's happening behind the scenes when watching Italy's matches, focus on concrete cues rather than headlines. Watch the first 10 minutes to assess whether rotation patterns are working. Do fullbacks overlap immediately after the pivot drops, or do they linger? Notice substitution timing and who the coach chooses to replace, like swapping a Mezzala for a more conservative central mid, because those decisions reveal whether the coach trusts the planned rotations. Look for body language on the bench. Players who stand and point to the field, who gesticulate instructions, or who refrain from eye contact with the coach are sending clear signals about internal alignment. Pay attention to warm-up routines too. Repeated, specific patterns in warm-ups often mirror the rotation sequences intended for the match. Learn to read on-field rotations in real time by tracking 3 elements: the trigger, the movement, and the cover. The trigger might be a backward pass into the pivot, the movement a winger inverting toward the half space, and the cover the opposite fullback stepping inside. If any of these components is missing, a trigger without a movement, or a movement without cover, the rotation fails and you'll see the team resort to long balls or isolated dribbles. Use freeze-frame replays and heat maps after the game to confirm patterns. Overlapping fullbacks produce wider heat zones. Successful striker drops create pocket heat between opposition lines. When watching the whole video, also note training footage and press conferences. Repeated references to specific rotations, combined with targeted training clips, show the coach's emphasis. If the coach keeps pushing the same rotations, but match footage shows hesitation, that's a signal worth considering before you choose a side. Deciding whose side to take, coach or players, benefits from concrete observation rather than emotion. If you see disciplined execution of rotation drills in training and clear tactical reasoning communicated calmly by the coach, but players continually fail to execute in matches, that points to an on-pitch trust or fitness issue favoring the coach's plan, but not its implementation. Conversely, if players consistently adapt rotations mid-game without prompting and those adaptations reduce risk and increase control, the player's reading of reality may be more accurate than the coach's pre-planned rotations. Watch the full video, note these cues, and then write in the comments whose side you're on: the coach with his rotation blueprint, or the players who must enact it under pressure. You've seen how selection fights, personality clashes, and unclear plans turn tactical choices into a locker room war. Key points: rotations are twofold: positional rotation during play, players swapping roles to create overloads and cover space, and squad rotation across fixtures, planned rest to preserve intensity. Theory becomes execution when the coach maps specific movements: who drops to allow a fullback to attack, which midfielder drifts wide in a 4-3-3, the exact substitution windows, typically 60, 75 minutes, and trigger events like opponent fatigue or a failed press. Reducing conflict is practical. Set minute targets, rehearse rotation patterns in training, assign set-piece and leadership roles, and communicate selection reasoning publicly so players know the plan. Leadership matters. Captains and staff must translate tactical briefs into trust on the pitch. You felt the tension because rotations felt like unexpected decisions rather than well-practiced tactics. Watching the game from this perspective, every change makes sense. If you want to put this into practice, start tracking minutes, positional heat maps, and substitution patterns. These are the metrics that turn theoretical analysis into a winning lineup. If this analysis helped you, please like, subscribe, and share in the comments what rotation you would use against an opponent who presses high. Continue watching the game more closely. Rotations aren't just player changes. They change the future of a team.